Welcome back, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce Raphi Levy, the CFO of Alpha Tau, a NASDAQ-listed company trading under the symbol DRTS. It's developing an exciting and innovative new cancer radiotherapy for a broad array of solid tumors with fantastic results across multiple tumor types. Raphi has been with the company for 4 years after spending 13 years at Goldman Sachs in New York and Tel Aviv, most recently leading the healthcare investment banking practice in Israel before leaving to join Alpha Tau in 2019. With that, Raphi, welcome to the Emerging Growth Conference, and we're excited to hear your presentation.
Great. Thank you, Anna. I'm excited to be here, and good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for your time. Thanks for joining. I'm excited to share our story, and why don't I just jump right in here. Maybe I'll start with just a quick intro as to who we are more broadly. We have developed a local alpha particle-based radiotherapy. This is a really exciting new form of radiation used for treating cancer. It's effectively injected into the tumor, as I'll show you, and it's intended to be used incredibly broadly across multiple tumor types. We've tried this across a very broad array of tumors. We'll talk about that both preclinically and clinically, and have yet to find a tumor type where this is not relevant. So we've developed a platform which is relevant effectively to a wide range of tumors, which can be customized for the tumor type and the way it needs to be delivered, and are currently underway with multiple trials running, looking to see data from those trials both this year and next year, and moving towards a potential US approval in 2025. Just to give you a bit of overview as to where we choose to focus our time, because we have a product which we believe is relevant nearly to every solid tumor, we've come up with 3 core focus areas. The first one is what we call the localized and unresectable market. These are tumors that may have other available options like head and neck cancers or skin cancers or prostate cancer, but the patients who have already used up their ability to get appropriate relief from surgery or from radiation, who have recurring tumors or non-resectable tumors, those patients run out of local options very quickly, and we have found in some of our earlier studies that we can be a very helpful new source of hope for these patients. And so that's where we've historically done much of our work. We are now shifting to our second pillar of our strategy, which we call the high unmet need. These are tumors that don't have any great options, and because we have a treatment which is relatively straightforward physics, and from what we can tell is indifferent to the nature of the tumor, we want to see if we can help provide new hope for these patients. And so tumor types that come to mind include pancreatic cancer, glioblastoma of the brain, and others. And then finally, one point which we'll talk about a bit in this presentation is the fact that we have seen that our treatment is not only treating the tumor into which it's injected, but also seems to have a systemic anti-tumor immune effect as well, where it's destroying the tumor that's being treated, but at the same time, also seems to awaken the immune system to find these tumors elsewhere in the body. And so here the thought is that for metastatic patients, in addition to treating a particular tumor, we may be able to find that we are awakening the immune system, and perhaps when used in combination with other therapies like checkpoint inhibitors, we can help that immune system find those other metastases elsewhere in the body. And to the extent that we can demonstrate that, then of course the potential here is just astounding in the way we may be able to take a local therapy and make it part of a systemic solution. And so we'll go through some data on this front. Again, there's quite a bit of interesting data to go through, some of which we'll get through in this presentation. And so if you look at what we're doing right now, again, taking a high-level strategic view, very busy now in where we are in our evolution. This year, we're focused on running our multi-center US pivotal trial, which we'll talk about. This is a trial being run in the US at up to 20 centers, looking at patients with recurrent skin cancer, looking to run that trial this year, get that data next year, and then apply for approval to be approved in 2025. At the same time, we also are getting underway with a number of exciting internal organ trials this year, including in the pancreas and the liver and the lungs. We're also looking to apply for approval in Japan, as well as to release long-term data from some of our earlier trials in the skin, head and neck setting, as well as an interim look at our pancreatic cancer data coming out of Canada later this year. Next year, we'll be focused on getting some of that data from that pivotal study, as well as getting our first approval in Japan, hopefully, as well as quite a bit of other data for trials we'll talk about, And then again, 2025, looking for that FDA approval and potentially our earliest launch. We've got a fantastic team put together to do this. On the management team side, our team is split between Israel and the US. Myself, I've already introduced. Uzi, our chairman and CEO, brings a wealth of experience having founded another medical device company and taken it from an idea all the way through research and development, approval, and commercialization. The professors who invented the technology give us a tremendous amount of their time as we continue to improve on the product. We're also joined by a number of very meaningful executives here, including Bobby Den, our chief medical officer, who joined us a couple of years ago. He's a Yale and Harvard Med School educated radiation oncologist based at Jefferson University. Amnon, our chief operating officer, oversees our manufacturing. Ronen, who's our chief technology officer, oversees much of our partnerships and collaborations with major universities and institutions. And Peter Melnick, who joined us more recently as our chief commercial officer, was formerly the CCO at a company called Novacure, also having developed a product which is a medical device used for treating cancer, for treating solid tumors, and took that product into what it is today, which is over $500 million in sales. So he brings tremendous experience on the commercial side as well. The board of directors is also very interesting. So we have a good mix here of medical technology, medtech, as well as biotech and oncology therapeutics experience, because of the fact that our product is fundamentally a medical device, but really in the fact that it is a single-use disposable therapeutic for treating cancers, very much competes with oncology therapeutics in the traditional sense. And so you see that mix here, whether it's Maury Blumenfeld, who was very senior at GE Healthcare, Alan Adler, who built a medical device business and sold it to Covidien, which is now Medtronic, on the medtech side. Mayor Jacobson, for example, who is the commercial representative of many of the large biotech companies, Amgen, Biogen, Moderna, in many of their international markets where they don't have their own sales force. Again, brings a tremendous amount of experience in oncology therapeutics marketing. And so again, you can see if you look at this really experienced board, how we bring a very balanced set of skills here as we get ready for the commercial opportunity ahead of us. Just saying a word about our financial position before I go into the technology. So we've been public now for just over a year, approaching a year and a half now. If you look at our most recent quarterly reports in Q1, we had over $100 million in cash and deposits. If you look at our more recent cash burn, it's been around $4 to $5 million a quarter, so about $17 or $18 million a year. And so at that rate, even as we continue to scale up, you can see why we have multiple years of cash runway and feel quite good about our financing position as we continue to execute on our clinical plan. And we'll talk about some of that plan. So maybe I'll spend just a few minutes talking about our technology and how it works and what makes it unique. And I'll start with just a minute of high school physics, just to remind you there are a few different forms of radioactive decay, a few different ways that isotopes can break down. The traditional forms that we think of are the beta decay, which is a release of an electron, or the gamma decay, which is a release of a photon. These are the traditional forms of radiation in that they tend to penetrate tissue, they penetrate walls, they get stopped by metal or by concrete. We're in the first one listed here. We're active in alpha radiation. This is where an isotope breaks down and releases a heavy alpha particle. So it's quite large, it's quite big, it's made of 2 protons, 2 neutrons. It's got tremendous energy to it, but because of its size and weight, it's just not able to get very far. It smacks into something and it stops in its tracks very quickly. Not only is it stopped by a sheet of paper, as you see here, but even by a few inches of air. Now, people have known for years that alpha radiation is incredibly more efficient in the way it kills cells, unlike the beta and gamma radiation used today for cancer therapy, which rely on chance encounters with oxygen, hopefully to do some weak damage to the tumor cell DNA. The alpha particles are massive and they just charge through the DNA. They cause double-strand breaks, which are irreparable. And so one can kill a tumor cell with a significantly lower dose of radiation. And yet today, all of the local cancer therapy, which more than half of cancer patients are getting, is being done using the gamma and beta radiation. And the reason is because they have a long range. As we've said, they go through tissue, they go through walls. And so because of that, one is able to cover the whole tumor without concern. When we'll put a large dose in the center of a tumor, because it's got that very inefficient form of cell death, and it will inevitably spread into the surrounding area, covering the tumor, but also doing damage to the surrounding healthy organs. Contrast that to alpha particles, when we place an alpha emitter inside of a tumor, we find that the particles themselves get about 40 to 90 microns of range, right? Incredibly tightly controlled, very, very, focused radiation, which is destroying those tumor cells. But unfortunately, 40 microns, which is 40 millionths of a meter, is clinically useless because that's enough to kill 3 or 4 cells. And one can't accomplish anything clinically using 3 or 4 cells at a time. And so we've come up with a solution to be able to overcome this issue, whereas no one else has figured out how to do local alpha radiation because no one can get the particles to move into the tumor to any useful depth. We've come up with an injection which is inserted directly into a tumor, which is coated with radium-224. And what's useful for us is that the radium breaks down multiple times and it releases multiple alpha particles along the way. And while the radium is trapped onto the source, its daughter atoms, the rest of that decay chain, will actually escape the source into the tumor, and it will continue to release these alpha particles deeper and deeper into the tumor as they diffuse away from the source into the tumor. And so maybe the best way to explain that is using a short animation. If we can please run that, it would be great to show that. And so as you can see, what we're going to do is inject this source into the tumor and leave it there, coated with this radium. And while the radium is unable to leave the source, once it breaks down those daughter atoms, themselves alpha-emitting radioisotopes, they're going to recoil off of the source into the tumor. And they're going to continue to move deeper and deeper into the tumor, propelled by a mix of diffusion and convection, and also recoil from firing off these heavy alpha particles, and what's left flies in the opposite direction. And so we're not getting the alpha particles to move any farther, we're actually releasing them deeper and deeper into the tumor. And so as you can see, the system is relatively straightforward. It's relying on the fact that these isotopes are diffusing deeper and deeper into the tumor. We're not getting these particles to move any farther, we're just releasing them deeper into the tumor. And so now instead of that 40 microns of range, which is completely useless, we get about 5 millimeters of range, which is quite a bit more useful. And that allows us to cover these tumors by putting multiple sources next to each other into the tumor, put them a couple millimeters apart, and ensure we get very good coverage of the tumor. So you don't have to take my word for it. Why don't we spend a few minutes talking about some of the data, and then we can talk about some of our plans. So let me just show you a couple of results here. First of all, I'll mention that preclinically in animal studies, we've done this in over 20 tumor types. We have never found a tumor type which doesn't respond. Again, this is quite unheard of for radiation therapy. We find that even tumors that are known to be resistant to traditional forms of radiation do respond to our treatment. And so we believe because this is relatively straightforward physics, it is indifferent to the type of the tumor, and it is also incredibly powerful, again, unable to see resistance from tumors, we believe it could be relevant to any tumor type. And so we just need to figure out how to inject these sources into the tumors, and we've developed a number of ways to do that. And so maybe I'll show you some examples here. Our first study, which we did in skin and head and neck tumors, had some very cool results here. You can see this patient, for example, is 80 years old, has already had radiation and surgery, still has multiple tumors in the ear, and unfortunately what they can do for this patient is to cut off their ear, which is a terrible outcome for anybody, and probably not survivable at 80 years old. Instead, what we've done is we've inserted a number of these sources. These sources are inside the ear. You don't see them anymore. They're being held by a string, by a suture, which they're strung onto, which is now retaining them in place. And that string is removed 2 weeks later once the radiation's been delivered. This patient, to the best of my knowledge, is still cancer-free and still has their ear 6 years later. Right? This was a very straightforward procedure to avoid a very drastic outcome. And so while we started with these sorts of patients, the patients with the very desperate situation after trying everything else, like radiation and surgery, once the doctors see how well it works, how there aren't any serious side effects, how it's very effective for this patient, they try and bring us newly diagnosed patients as well. So you can see here, this gentleman is 68 years old, has a newly diagnosed scalp tumor, hasn't been treated before. Now the scalp is tricky because in the elderly it's quite friable, so if you try resecting this tumor surgically, the skin will start disintegrating in your hand. It's obviously a very sensitive area to radiate because of the proximity to the brain. And as you can see here, all we did is we insert some of these sources. We take them out 2 weeks later. Here's a picture after a month from treatment. you can see the tumor has not only been destroyed, but it's also disappeared. The skin has healed very nicely. And so again, the patient got an outstanding response here and avoided a very drastic outcome. By the way, it's interesting that we believe that this skin healing is characteristic of the inflammatory and immune response that I referred to earlier in passing. We've seen this in a number of cases where the skin heals very nicely. We even had a patient where we treated her cheek for cancer, and she was so happy with the way her skin regrew that she asked if we would treat her other cheek, even though she didn't have cancer, which is ridiculous that we didn't do that. But you can understand why, this is a very exciting element, as you'll see in a second. So interestingly, we had in this trial, we had one patient who came in to our trial in Italy and in Israel. And I'm not sure if there we go. So she had multiple tumors in the legs. The doctors decided to treat one tumor before the others. You could see this is a 3-centimeter lesion. It was treated by the alpha radiation. A month later, they're looking for the cancer. What you see here is a suture from a biopsy looking for cancer and not finding it. Her cancer had disappeared, and she was deemed a complete responder on this tumor. So this was a fantastic outcome for the first tumor, and the doctors said, let's now treat the other tumors. And so they wanted to schedule her for the next treatment, and they figured, let's go find the other cancer, the other tumors, see how big they've gotten. And when they meant to measure them, they found that the untreated tumors had disappeared as well. And we never touched the other leg. We know that the alpha radiation has no range to go from one leg to the other. And so either this woman had a miraculous recovery, which is fantastic, or as we've long suspected, and as I've referred to earlier, we suspect that the immune system may have been awakened by our treatment and then found this tumor elsewhere in the body. And in fact, we've seen this effect in a number of patients now where we will treat one tumor and other tumors in the body will disappear as well. Very exciting effect that we're seeing. And so we're quite busy now. I'll spend maybe just a minute talking about what we're working on and what are the opportunities ahead of us. But we're very, very busy across a number of fronts. First of all, I'll mention that as we started in skin and oral cavity squamous cell carcinoma, this is our first indication, cancers of the skin or the head and neck. That indication, by the way, is already approved in Israel, so we can market it in Israel, in our home country. We're about to apply for approval in Japan, having finished our pivotal study there as well. And our focus is on the US, where we finished a feasibility study in the US last year very successfully, and are now in the middle of a pivotal trial, which is akin to a phase 3 for a drug, looking to run that trial over the course of this year and the beginning of next year, get the data next year and submit it for approval. And as I said, looking for potential approval in 2025. At the same time, because we believe the product is relevant to a broad array of tumors, we are dipping our toes, as it were, into a few different cancer types, trying to demonstrate that in fact, we are indifferent to the type of the tumor. And so we have a couple of cool trials going on, including a pancreatic cancer trial running right now in Canada, as well as another site being opened soon in Israel. We have a liver cancer trial opening very soon in Canada, and are about to start on breast cancer and lung cancer in Israel, together with some other ones as well. Hopefully brain cancer is coming down the line very soon. One other interesting trial is we have a trial running in Israel in combination with Keytruda pembrolizumab, which is one of the leading cancer immunotherapies these days, excuse me, where we treat one tumor and the patients are getting systemic Keytruda on the background, and we are checking the untreated tumors to see if we can help actually awake that immune system. Do we see that synergy there where unfortunately response rates to these cancer immunotherapies are very low? Can we help increase those response rates using our local therapy, awakening the immune system? And so because of how busy we are, there's quite a number of exciting catalysts coming up. Just to hit on a few, in the next few weeks and months, we should have our first patient coming in a number of important studies, liver cancer, a second pancreatic site, and lung cancer, as well as our submission for approval in Japan. We're also expecting to release long-term efficacy and safety data from our earlier trials in the skin, head, and neck. Remember, some of those patients that you saw were treated in 2017 and 18, so we have data now on patients for up to 4 or 5 years out. And so we're looking to release some of that later this year, which is very exciting for us to show, can we show that a local response to in the tumor that's measured immediately after treatment can actually drive better long-term outcomes for these patients. Later in the year, we'll look for an interim readout of the safety data from our pancreatic cancer trial going on in Canada right now. And then next year, among other things, we should see the completion of the recruitment in our US multi-center trial in skin cancer, as well as potentially the approval in Japan. Finally, just to summarize the story, hit on a few highlights before we pause for questions. So I'll just hit on what we think are the most compelling elements here of the story. Again, first of all, is having our own unique technology, the only one to figure out how to deliver alpha radiation locally to destroy tumors and leave the surrounding healthy tissue intact. Secondly, is that broad applicability, where we've done this across a very broad range of tumors. In preclinical work, it's been over around 20 types of tumors. Again, everything seemed to respond, no tumor types had resistance. Number three, as I mentioned, this immunostimulatory effect, where we see that the treatment is not only destroying the tumor that it's being intended to treat, but also awakening that immune system response and potentially synergetic with other therapies. In terms of some of our data, you've seen that some of the patients from that first study that we did in squamous cell carcinoma of the skin or the head and neck, and in fact, we had a fantastic outcome across the trial, a 100% overall response rate. Every tumor we treated shrank by at least 30%, a 78% complete response rate where the tumor disappeared completely. That data is fantastic, but also has gotten better and better. Our most recent trial that completed and read out was that pilot study that I mentioned in the US. It was a small skin cancer trial that was run in multiple centers in the US, led by Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York. And so that trial read out just about a year and a half ago with a 100% complete response rate. Every tumor we treated disappeared completely and stayed disappeared. So really fantastic outcome there. And again, what's important here is not only that these patients are seeing great responses, but as you see in number 5, we've got a very, very strong safety profile. We don't see the massive side effects, the systemic side effects that patients with radiation oncology tend to get. The nausea, the fatigue, the vomiting. We see local side effects in the area of the treatment, what's called grade 1 or grade 2, mild or moderate. We don't see these serious or life-threatening side effects. So again, it's a relatively mild clinical cost for them in terms of the side effects to be able to get these fantastic outcomes. We've got some fantastic trials, as I mentioned, including that US trial looking for FDA approval in recurrent skin cancer. I'll note, by the way, we have 2 breakthrough device designations from the FDA. This is where the FDA notes that we have a unique product which may be able to help patients without a good standard of care. And so we have one such designation in skin cancer, as well as another one in glioblastoma of the brain, 2 very, very different cancers. Logistics has historically been an Achilles heel for many of the radiotherapy companies in terms of isotope supply or transport of these radioactive products. Fortunately, it's quite a bit easier for us. We don't have time to go into it too much, but we use an isotope that's very easy to come by. And because we use such low levels of radiation, we're shipping them in accepted packages, meaning they actually fall outside the rules for radioactive handling. They can go in a cardboard box on DHL or FedEx for that matter. We've got a very strong IP franchise, over 90 patents granted around the world, over 120 applications are pending. Again, a very strong mix of patents around this to protect the product. And finally, as I mentioned earlier, a fantastic team with a very good mix of skills to take this from the clinic and into the commercial setting. So with that, I'm going to pause now. That wraps up my prepared remarks, but I'd love to take any questions from the group. Thank you again.
Great job, Raphi. Yeah, we've got some questions in a little bit of time. Let's start with, what kind of cancers are ideal treatment targets for your technology? Is it just primary solid tumor?
Yeah, so in theory, it could be any solid tumor. We're not going to go for liquid tumors because we're not going to chase blood cells around the body. But for any solid tumor, we think it could be relevant. We need to develop a way to get to those tumors, and that's what our R&D efforts are focused on. They're not pipelines of molecules. They're pipelines of new engineering applicators to deliver these sources into the tumor. And so far, we've developed ways to get to the skin and the head and neck and the brain and the liver and the prostate, the kidney, the lungs. So again, we haven't found a tumor we can't get to. In general, we tend to find that clinicians come to us first with the most difficult cases, the ones who have failed other forms of therapy and really are desperate for a solution. And then as they get used to the product and see how easy it is to use, how strong the results are, we see them use it more and more broadly across a broader array of patients.
And talk about how invasive is this procedure to patients, and what limitations do they face while getting treated?
Yeah, good question. So all these methods of delivery are using ultra-minimally invasive applicators. So we've developed our own engineering solutions. In general, these don't require hospitalization. For almost all the tumor types that we're looking at, the patient comes in, we deliver them these sources based on a pre-agreed treatment plan, and the patient can leave the hospital an hour or two later. Interestingly, because we're using such low levels of radiation, and the alpha radiation has really no range even to travel through air, so we don't generally see a lot of the radiation safety protections that you would normally see in radiation oncology. You don't need that metal, in the walls and in the floors and in the metal lead vest and that kind of stuff. We do this in any room in the hospital. There's no protection at all because of this incredibly small dose of radiation.
And so what are your main input materials, and are they easy to get?
Yeah, so our product is, again, it's primarily a metal source, which is impregnated with radium-224. We get that from thorium-228, which is a radioisotope that we buy. It's relatively easily accessible. There are a number of sources of it. At the moment, we're primarily buying it from the U.S. Department of Energy in Tennessee, or from Eckert & Ziegler, which is a German nuclear medicine company. But it's largely an unwanted byproduct of some other nuclear reactions. So we don't have a reactor. We buy it out of a reactor, and we use it to generate the radium that goes into our product. Thankfully, we haven't seen supply issues there be an issue.
And talk about some of the safety and efficacy data you've seen to date in humans.
Yeah, so absolutely. So as I mentioned, the first study was very strong. We saw 100% overall response rate, where every tumor at least shrank by 30% and most of them disappeared. Very consistent safety data from there as well, where we only see those local, mild, and moderate side effects. The data has consistently been strong across our trials. So if you look at our annual report, which is the last time we did a pooled analysis of all of our studies in the head and neck and skin setting. So when we looked across then, we had treated by then about 120 patients, or tumors rather, and by the time, those who had reached the endpoints at that point in time, back in February or March when we published our report, we had a 97% overall response rate. Again, we've seen very, very consistently strong data across multiple sites now, having done this in the US, Europe, Israel, Japan. We continue to see that strong data across the world.
And we have a question wanting to ask you about your competitors. Talk about your competition out there and what's your differentiating factor?
Sure. So I'd say, first of all, I like to think about the world of cancer therapies dividing between systemic therapies and local therapies to explain how we think about competition. So there are drugs which are injected, which will have some form of trying to find tumors, little metastases around the body, and trying to clear them from the body. We're not active in that space. We're active in the space of local cancer therapy. This is the traditional paradigm where a clinician will look at an image of a tumor and say, I see that tumor over there and I want to cut it out or radiate it. And that's where we're playing. So we're primarily competing with surgery, with better surgical techniques, with a scalpel, as well as with traditional forms of radiation, those gamma and beta forms of radiation. We're not aware of anybody who's developed a method like this to get alpha particles directly into a tumor for cancer therapy. And so again, we think that we're just really a world apart from many of those cancer therapies because we find that these alpha particles have incredible force that overwhelm the tumors in a way that other forms of radiation don't. And so we're feeling very good about our competitive positioning.
And talk about what your next catalysts are. When are they?
Sure. So I think we hit on a few of them. So we've got the long-term safety data, safety and efficacy data coming out very soon, as well as a number of important trials being initiated. We've got the pancreatic cancer interim lookout after the first 5 patients, looking at safety and feasibility out of Canada. That should be coming later on in the year. Our submission in Japan and continued recruitment in the pivotal study, looking to complete that recruitment in the pivotal study around the beginning of next year, as well as to get the approval in Japan in the head and neck cancers around the middle of next year as well.
And last question due to time, talk a little bit about your financials. Do you need capital, and what is your cash runway?
Sure. Like I said, we've got over $100 million in cash, so we're feeling very good about that. I think if markets were stronger, we could consider taking cash off the table in the future to be able to fund some of our expansion plans. But for now, with the way we're continuing to run our trials very carefully, although aggressively in terms of running multiple studies, the way we continue to build out manufacturing capacity slowly but surely. Again, we've got at the current burn rate, we've communicated 2+ years. The reality is probably more than that, just given that $17 to $18 million burn rate at the moment on a run rate basis, and over $100 million in cash in the balance sheet.
Perfect. Raphi, do you have any closing remarks for our viewers today?
Just to thank them very much. We'll be back again for some updates along the next couple of weeks as the future conferences come online. So looking forward to being back again and to have, entertaining any questions. And again, thanks very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great work and great presentation. We look forward to your continuing updates with us. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay, everyone,
Bye.
stay with us. We have Kintara Therapeutics. They're coming up next.